Well, we've done it. We've gotten through the end of the Amidah, all 19 blessings of the 18 blessing prayer. We finished it. Our last blessing was Hamavarech et Amo Yisrael v'Shalom, praising God for blessing Israel with peace. And when we pray the Amidah out loud, that's the ending point of the Amidah. But if you look in your Siddur, in fact, there's one more page. So in Sim Shalom for Shabbat, it's on page 120. And in the weekday edition, it's on page 44. And it's this final blessing, this final prayer, it's in the middle of the page, that begins Elohai Netzor. So my God, keep my tongue from evil, right? We'll talk a little bit more about what it means. There's a number of things that are very different about this paragraph, about this prayer, compared to everything that has come before. I'll mention two right now. One is it's not a bracha. It does not end with a Baruch Atah formula at the end. So it's something else. And two, unlike the rest of the Amidah, it's in the first person singular, right? It's about me, I, whereas the rest of the Amidah was always plural, right? It was about we, all of the Jewish people. So those are some very big distinctions. And as we'll see also, just the content as well is much more personal than the rest of the Amidah. So I actually don't want to start with the prayer. I want to start by looking at a statement by Rabbi Nachman of Wrocław. So he was one of the great Hasidic Rebbes, lived in the 18th century. The Wrocław Hasidim still have Rabbi Nachman as their Rebbe. So after Rabbi Nachman died, there was no replacement. And so they're waiting for him to come back, essentially. And so the story is that his chair, he had the chair in Breslov that he would sit in. They smuggled it out of Europe in pieces, reassembled it, and now the Rebbe's chair is in Jerusalem in the Breslov yeshiva or yeshiva / synagogue, and they're keeping it safe for him for when he comes back, right? So certainly a lot of messianic aspects of the Breslover Hasidim. You may have seen in Israel, or pictures of Israel, or hats with this phrase that's Nachman Me'uman, right? Nachman Me'uman, which Uman is the place in Ukraine where he was from. So it's Nachman Me'uman, right? He's Nachman from Uman. And so there's this idea that if enough people say this in the right mystical way with enough piety, then the Rebbe will come back. So that's Rebbe Nachman. But I'm not sure that he intended for all of that. He didn't write anything down. Like many of the early Hasidic Rebbes, it was their followers that wrote down their teachings and then published them. So one of those publications is, let's see here, it's called Sichot Haran. So Sichot means kind of conversations or teachings. So teachings of the Ran. Ran is Reish Nun, which stands for Rabbi Nachman, right? So these are teachings that have been recorded, taken down, and preserved in Rabbi Nachman's name. So this is Sichot Haran number 229. It's a large discussion where it's talking about prayer. And so the person recording this says, Shamati Bishmo, Shahaya Medaber Imechai Mibnei HaNeurim, right? So I heard in his name that he was teaching with one of his young acolytes, right? So in other words, the person recording this heard somebody else tell him the following story. He was strengthening him a lot, right? He was trying to really encourage him. Me'od, a lot. Behitbodedut v'sicha beino levein kono. In meditation, hitbodedut is meditation, and sicha, and conversation between himself and between his creator. Belashon shemedabrim bo, in the language that people speak, right? In the everyday tongue, probably Yiddish. Kidarko zichrono levracha, according to his way, may his memory be a blessing, right? So Rabbi Nachman is known for having all of these conversations with God, right? They're kind of one-directional conversations, but Rabbi Nachman was big on extemporaneous prayer. He would pour out whatever was in his heart in that particular moment, and he would even use language of going to war with God, right? So some of the great prayers that have been recorded are basically Rabbi Nachman offering a deal that you forgive us and we'll forgive you and we'll call it even, right? So something to that effect. But Rabbi Nachman had a very personal, direct relationship with God, let's say. And so here we have somebody telling a story where he was teaching one of, a young scholar, young student or something, that he was encouraging him to do the same thing, right? And to do it in the common language, right? The language he speaks every day, the language he understands, and to talk to God and meditate, on God in a very personal and direct way. All right, but then it goes on. Ve'amarlo, and he said to him, this is Rabbi Nachman now saying to this young student, Shebitchila ze'aya ikar hatfilah. Ma shaya kol echad medaber ma shebelibo lifnei Hashem yitbarach belashon shayu midabrim bo. So this is how it used to be, right? This was the original essence of prayer, right? Every person would speak what was in his heart before God may be blessed in the language that he was accustomed to speak. And he says, Kamivoar Rambam, as it's explained in Rambam, right? So he's describing the original prayer, the original nature of prayer was completely personal and extemporaneous, right? There was no fixed liturgy whatsoever. Person in the language they speak every day would direct their prayers to God. And he cites Rambam, right? So what does Rambam say? He says, Betchilat Hilchot Tefilah. So in the beginning of Rambam's Hilchot Tefilah, so laws of Tefilah, Tefilah as we know is the Amidah. So Rambam in the Mishnah Torah has, it's very well organized, very clearly presented. And at the beginning of his laws of the Tefilah, he gives a little history lesson, right? And he talks about the development of prayer. And so Rambam tells this exact thing. So Rabbi Nachman is not making this up. This is exactly what Rambam says. He explains how we got to the point where we're at today. So he says, "B'tchilat hilchot tefilah, ayin sham shmever sham zoritev." You can go and look there because it says it very clearly in that place. Shebetchilah, at first, hayazeh ikar hatfilah. This was the essence of prayer. V'kach ach acher kach ra'u anshei knesset hagdola. Uvo tiknu seder hatfilah ayin sham, right? So then Rambam explains that originally people were praying in this extemporaneous way, and then afterwards, the men of the Great Assembly came along, and they decreed the set liturgy. And you can go and look at Rambam for all the details, right? Rambam goes on quite a bit in a lot more detail about why this was necessary, and there was kind of a decline in people's knowledge and education, and the language got all messed up. And so the men of the Great Assembly, which this is in Ezra the scribe's era, so maybe 5th century BCE, the men of the Great Assembly established a fixed liturgy, which prior to then had not existed, right? And they did it because people were no longer able to pray in this more ideal extemporaneous way, which got to the essence of prayer. So here, this in Sichot HaRan, it does a good job of summarizing exactly what Maimonides says. And now we go back to Rabbi Nachman. Aval, al kol panim midina zehu ikar hatfilah. But, right, by all accounts, according to the law, this is the essence of tefillah. This is the essence of prayer, right? It's the spontaneous, extemporaneous prayer that is really what prayer is supposed to be about. Al kain, therefore, gam achshav, even now, shemitpalin seder hatfilah shetiknu anshe knesset hagdola tov. All right, so even now, when we pray, the set liturgy that was established by the men of the Great Assembly. So even though we've got this very fixed liturgy, tov me'od la'adam liot ragil lihipalel lifnei Hashem yiparach. So nevertheless, it is tov me'od, right? What is tov me'od?
Very good.
Very good, right? It's very, Rabbi Nachman says tov me'od. It's very good for a person to be regular in praying before God. May God be blessed. What should a person be regular in doing? Tefilot, utchinot, uvakashot. So tefilot, prayers. Utchinot are supplications. A supplication is where we're asking God for mercy, even though we don't feel like we deserve it. And bakashot are requests. So prayers, supplications, and requests. Milibo, belashon shemevin. Right? Person should do this from his heart in a language that he understands. Right? So that God should may be blessed, should bring him merit to his service in truth. Right? So we're going to develop this relationship with God, and then God is going to help us serve God even better. Ki zeh ikar hatfilah, because this is the essence of the Tefilah. This is the essence of what prayer is. Kaniskar la'el, as we described earlier. All right, so then he goes ahead and you can look in other places, and a number of different places according to our words, in the way that a person should accustom himself to do this and to give himself encouragement in this behavior. And then he concludes, She'al yedei zeh daika, because in this way specifically, ba'u kol tzadikim l'madrigatam ayin sham. This is how all of the tzaddikim, all of the righteous people arrived at their level, their kind of exalted level, and you can go and look there. So he's saying that, every tzaddik, right, any person that achieves this level of piety has part of the reason that they got there is because they regularly were praying in their own words, out of their hearts, using their own language, right, in the first person, right? They were also doing the fixed liturgy. Don't get me wrong on that, but as a supplement, and so that's striking to see this. It's almost a rejection of the efficacy of fixed liturgy, right? As it's not really what is ideal.
So the history of fixed liturgy, because he's insinuating that the fixed liturgy only comes up with the Great Assembly and Ezra, but the competing theory is that it comes from the sacrificial system.
Sorry, it comes to say it again, Max.
That the fixed liturgy derives from the sacrificial system from the Torah.
Right. So, and we saw the two different versions, right? That on the one hand, we have this legend of, the history with the men of the Great Assembly, and that, or the other alternative being that the rabbis constructed this as a replacement for the temple worship. And by the way, Maimonides, he blends those two together. And so he does talk about, this early phase of spontaneous prayer. And by the way, there are plenty of examples in the Bible itself of people offering spontaneous prayer. There's much more spontaneous prayer than there is fixed prayer in the Bible itself. And maybe there is a historical, to say that over the course of the Second Temple period, there was a gradual development of fixed prayers, which I think is probably true. We've seen a bit of evidence of that, but it wasn't really until the rabbis that it kind of went on steroids, where they really kind of laid it all out exactly.
It was very fixed, and I guess the notion of fixedness migrated from that to prayer.
Yes. Now, something else that Maimonides says is that that the requirement from the Torah is to pray to God, right? And to pray in your own language. That's the essence of the requirement. The idea of praying in a particular way not from the Torah. Praying at particular times, not from the Torah. And by the way, that's why Maimonides says that, in the classic trio of women, women and slaves, and maybe it's just two, are obligated in prayer, because prayer is a positive commandment that does not have fixed time, right? And so the general rabbinic principle is that women are obligated, are not obligated in positive time-bound commandments, right? Now, if we want to say that there's a morning prayer and an afternoon prayer, that's time-bound. But what Rambam is saying is that, no, that's not actually required. And therefore, even kind of in a very traditional perspective, women are considered to have an obligation for daily prayer. It's just that there's no form or fixed time. What does it need? It needs these three things that Rabbi Nachman mentions: Tefilah, Tachanun, and Bakasha, right? So prayer, supplication, and request. Those are the three elements that make up prayer.
Well, if
I have a question. The dates that are listed, is that how long he lived? He was only 38 years old then.
Yeah, he died young. I think tuberculosis.
Wow. And then he was so revered.
Yeah.
He must have done a lot of things in that short lifespan.
He did.
Wow,
He
that's
certainly did,
impressive.
how can one of the elements of prayer be prayer? So, because what does that then mean?
Yeah. What do we mean by tefillah? I mean, what do we mean by prayer? Right? What was in the Amidah? Amidah, we saw it's got praise, right? We had the opening three, which are essentially about praise, and we have a middle section that's about bakasha, and we have a closing section which is about thanks. In speaking in very broad terms.
So would it mean that the three required elements would be praise, supplications, and asking for things?
Yeah.
Okay.
But again, the most important thing is that it be personal, come out of the heart.
Would the rabbinic tradition somehow say that the reason they had to have a fixed prayer is because, if a spontaneous prayer was coming from someone learned, then it's all good, but there were people who needed guidance in knowing what to say, so the masses needed a fixed prayer?
Well, actually, Rambam specifically says that it has to do with the convolution of the language. And he even cites a passage from Ezra, I think, which talks about that, you had these returnees coming in from Babylonia, and they're mixing with the local population, and the language is getting all mixed up. And basically there's this just confusion taking place in society. And so therefore there's some sort of need of consolidation in order to get things back under control. And then actually that's exactly what's going on in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, where they're trying to rebuild the temple and they're trying to get people back on track. So so it's not such a stretch to imagine that they established some sort of fixed prayer at that time. So
I have a question about the wording on this. I'm not sure I understand what the difference between a supplication and a request. Isn't a supplication a way of asking?
Yeah, so supplication is specifically a request for mercy, right? So it's and when we get into Tachanun, we'll get into that in more detail. Supplication means I'm not worthy, but save me anyways, right? Bakasha, a request. So the 13 middle blessings of the Amidah, those are requests, right? Knowledge and wisdom and forgiveness and healing and prosperity and return from exile, right? So we're asking God to do things for us, but not necessarily based on our merit or lack of merit. We're asking God to do things for us. Right.
Okay, just because the English there's overlap, and so I just understand more.
I mean, yeah, that's the problem. Like, how do you translate tachanunim? I don't know. So I throw out supplication, recognizing that I don't even know what supplication means. Right? Yeah. You're right. It's not. You got one word that contains a much bigger idea behind it.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Sure.
On the bottom paragraph, which says request from the depths of your heart in the language you understand best.
Yeah.
this is the 1770s. Where is he referring to? As to which communities is he talking about? That
Well, Rabbi Nachman, he's in Eastern Europe. He's in the Pale Settlement.
okay.
They're speaking Yiddish. So that's probably what it means.
Yiddish and Hebrew. Okay.
Russian probably.
Yeah, I mean, they probably, well, I'll just, if you read some of the Hasidic commentaries that are written in Hebrew, one of the things that comes out is that their Hebrew is not very good, right? So, Yiddish was their language. That's what they spoke.
Okay.
And so, when Rabbi Nachman is praying, he's probably praying in Yiddish, and that's what he's advising
Okay.
his students to do as well. Got to come from the heart.
Okay.
Okay. Now we're going to jump back to the 2nd century. And remember, the 2nd century, this is early. This is right as the rabbis have kind of begun this process of establishing our fixed prayer service. This is the Tosefta, right? So not the Mishnah, the Tosefta, which is the kind of the supplementary material, same era as the Mishnah, but not in the Mishnah. So it says, Ein omrim davar achar emet v'yatziv. A person may not say a word after emet v'yatziv. All right, what is emet v'yatziv? May I remember what that?
Truth.
Truth of something.
Yeah. True and firm, but what is emet v'yatziv?
Third blessing, or first blessing after the Shema.
Correct. Yeah. So the first blessing after the Shema begins with the words emet v'yatziv. So what does it say? Ein omrim davar achar emet v'yatziv. You're not allowed to say any word after emet v'yatziv, right? Remember, we saw earlier this idea that we have to connect, in a number of places, connect one prayer to the thing that comes immediately afterwards. We're not allowed to have any interruptions. So one of those was from the end of the Shema to emet v'yatziv, right? So that's where that word emet serves as the overlapping word, and we're not supposed to interrupt that. And the other place was from Ga'al Yisrael to the Amidah. So right before the Amidah, there's not supposed to be any interruption. So this is essentially saying the same thing. Ein omrim davar achar emet v'yatziv. So after the third blessing of Shachrei, so the blessing after we finished saying the Shema, you're not allowed to interrupt by saying anything.
Is that in the Siddur somewhere?
Yeah, sure. If you're in the for Shabbat,
Yeah.
and festivals, we're on page 113.
113.
Weekday, we're on 34. So both pages look exactly the same. So we've got at the top of the page, the third paragraph of the Shema. And then there's a little note that says the bracha after Kriyat Shema, right? And it begins emet v'yatziv, right? And if you turn the page and go to the end of the page, this is on 114 or page 35, the very last line, Baruch atah Hashem Ga'al Yisrael. Right? That's the ending bracha of the prayer emet v'yatziv, right? So this is saying you can't say anything after Ga'al Yisrael. Why? Because we're supposed to be going straight into the Amidah. And we're supposed to connect the concept of redemption, Ga'al Yisrael, Redeemer of Israel. We're supposed to connect redemption to the Tefilah. Have a smooth transition with no interruptions. So that's what this Tosefta is teaching. Right? Aval, but omrin dvarim achar Tefilah, afilu keseder vidui Yom Kippurim. He says, but one may speak words, say things after the Tefilah, so after the Amidah, even according to the order of the confession of Yom Kippur, right? So what does it mean according to the order of the confession of Yom Kippur? Not 100% clear. I saw some translations suggesting as long as the Yom Kippur, right? You could spend as much time as you, on a daily basis, you can spend as much time offering personal prayers as we do on Yom Kippur. It might be more specific, that we're talking specifically about Seder Vidu Yom Kippur, reciting the confession of Yom Kippur. But in the 2nd century, what did they mean by the confession of Yom Kippur? Again, not totally, we don't really know, because what we know of the confession today, that's Ashamnu, right? Ashamnu Baga, right? Or Al Chet Shechatanu Lechem, right? All right, these confession of all of these sins in alphabetical order, those did not exist in the days of the Mishnah and the Tosefta, right? Those are much later. So what did they mean by the vidui, the confession of Yom Kippur? Don't really know. But they're making interesting that there's a comparison that when we finish the Amidah, we can offer something personal that potentially has similarities to what's going on Yom Kippur. And that's kind of interesting that we have this element of Yom Kippur that's existing on a daily basis.
You know, I find it a little confusing. If you're not supposed to say anything after the Emet Siva, you have other prayers where you have other closing prayers. And then on 114, you have something that you recite with the Micha Mocha Ba'elim Adonai and so
That's
forth.
all part of Emet V'Yatziv.
It's all a part of it. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't understand.
Yes.
And Rabbi,
Yes.
so when it says you're not supposed to say anything from there until the end of the Amidah, where do they define the end of the Amidah?
Mm-hmm. That's an excellent question. Which leads us to...
I've heard Orthodox folks say that the Elohai Netzor paragraph is part of the Amidah, even though it's probably not.
Well, let's find out.
Uh-huh.
All right, so we're going to look at Elohai Netzor, which is what's up on my screen right now. In our Siddur, it's on page 120 on the Shabbat and Festivals, on page 44 in the weekday. Elohai Netzor. So I'm going to go ahead and read this in English. And let's start by just see if, what are the themes that jump out in this prayer. My God, guard my tongue from evil and my lips from speaking slander. To those who curse me, may my soul be silent, and may my soul be like dust to all. Let's say heart, sorry about that. Open my heart to your Torah, and may my soul pursue your commandments. As for all who think evil upon me, quickly bring their advice to naught and frustrate their plan. Do it for the sake of your name. Do it for the sake of your right hand. Do it for the sake of your holiness. Do it for the sake of your Torah, for the sake of delivering your beloved. Save with your right hand and answer me. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable to you, Adonai, my rock and my redeemer. May the one who brings peace on high bring peace to us and to all Israel, and say Amen.
Amen.
All right. So what are the themes that jump out?
No Lashon Hara.
Does it say that?
Guard
No.
my tongue from evil and my lips from speaking slander.
Okay, good. All right, I could. So help me avoid Lashon Hara specifically, yeah.
And then I'm looking at my Siddur, frustrate the designs of those who plot evil against me and make nothing of their schemes. I pray a lot, and I think it works. I prayed for that particular sentence a lot of times.
Yeah.
And those people were punished.
All right, well, should be careful about praying for God to smite our enemies, but
Well, I'm just going exactly by what it says here.
Yeah.
I'm not adding anything. I'm not saying smite or so.
right. But it's saying, if they're plotting something evil against me, let it not work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Exactly. That's what it means.
Yeah, and then if they're slandering me, I'm supposed to be silent.
Yeah, help me kind of maintain equanimity, which is that's a pretty powerful thing to say.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like anger management.
Exactly. Yeah. Which is quite.
But then like, what's the? How do you then ever counter evil against you? All you can do is trust in God. You're not supposed to take action yourself.
Say that,
That's what this prayer seems to be saying.
but you're asking.
But I think
Right.
also when it says, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable to you, I think it doesn't say you can't speak anything, but do it with conscience.
Mm-hmm.
So your translation here says, "To those who curse me, may my soul be silent, and may my soul be like dust to all."
Yeah. So this.
What does that mean? Because it's not the
It's
same.
using a yeah, it's using kind of the standard parallel style that is used in biblical poetry in the Psalms, right? So we've got everything's in duplicate, right? Guard my tongue from evil, my lips from speaking slander, right? To those who curse me, right? May my soul be silent, may my soul be like dust to all, right? So it's kind of saying the same thing twice, right? So if my soul is like dust, it's meaning like I'm not rising up. I'm not doing anything to respond to somebody who's cursing me. Okay. So this is at the end of the Amidah. It's as I mentioned earlier, it's first person, so it's an extremely personal prayer. These are not things that you would ask for on behalf of your community. These are things that you would ask for yourself, right? Help me, I don't. What we say is that's what we do every day, right? We speak, we interact with people, and it's so difficult to, let's say, restrain ourselves and speak thoughtfully about everything that comes out of our mouth, and so this is included here.
When I read this, for many years when I've read this, it has always meant to me to bring peace to me, and for me to kind of ask for peace and to bring peace to me in my being and my way with others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, thank you. I never really thought about the role of the Oseh Shalom at the end, right? That because after talking about my own language and helping me kind of maintain my cool even when people are doing nasty things around me, that maybe my ability to do that has a role in peacemaking as well. Yeah, because
my favorite sentence is the Yehi Ratzon mir Fanach. What's the one here? Yehi Ratzon.
Second to last, probably.
Yeah, the second to last. That is really the essence of that whole prayer for me.
Yeah. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable to you. So that kind of serves, I think, as a concluding statement for the Amidah, right? Yeah. Everything I've just said, please listen to everything I've just said. May it be acceptable to you. Similarly, if you remember back at the beginning of the Amidah, where we started with Adonai Sifatai Tiftach Ufi Yagid Tilatecha, right? Lord, open my lips that my mouth may declare your glory. There's also this statement, this appeal to, help me pray, right? Help me open my mouth. And here, okay, now I've just said all these words. Please accept all these words that just came out of my mouth, right? So it kind of serves as a nice bookend.
Yeah, I really love this. And I always frustrated because everything goes so fast. I try to finish it and not listen to anything else until I get to finish it. I read it in English because I can understand it better. Yeah, but it's to me, it wraps up the whole essence of the prayer.
So now the question is, where does it come from? That is the question.
So.
All right, so let's look in the Talmud. Now keep in mind that.
Could I just ask, I don't know if it's that, but it sort of reminds me of the morning when you're in mourning. I sort of see a lot of these things, if I remember correctly.
In mourning?
Careful not to slander the deceased.
Yeah, well. Yeah, well, our Lashon Hara is the hardest mitzvah to follow.
Oh boy.
Every year, right? Yeah. Let's look in the Talmud. Now, remember the Tosefta that we saw, right? Where it said that one may speak words after the Amidah. Okay, and remember also what we saw at the very beginning when we were seeing what Rabbi Nachman talked about and quoting the Rambam about how the essence of prayer is the extemporaneous, pouring out of the heart in one's own words. So this is from Tractate Brachot, which we've looked at many times. And it's two examples of personal prayers that rabbis of Babylonia, the era of the Gemara, recited, right? These are their personal prayers. And there are many others in this context. I just brought these particular two as examples. So here's the first one. Rava Batar Tzlote Amarhachi. So Rava is one of the great Babylonian Amoraim. After his tzlote is the Aramaic word for prayer. After his Tefilah, he would say, Elohai, ad shelo notzarti eni kadai, v'achshav shenotzarti ki'ilu lo notzarti. My God, before I was created, I was worthless. And now that I've been created, it is as if I had not been created. Right? Afar ani b'chayai, kal v'chomer b'mitati. Right? I am dust in life, all the more so in my death. Hare ani lefanecha kichli male busha uchlima. I am before you as a vessel filled with shame and humiliation. Yehi ratzon lefanecha Adonai Elohai shelo echateh od u'ma shechatati lefanecha marek barachamecha harabim. So may it be your will, Lord my God, that I will sin no more, and that those transgressions that I have committed cleanse in your abundant mercy. Aval, but lo al yedei yisurin v'cholaim ra'im, but not by means of suffering and serious illness. All right, so that's Rava's prayer. Is that familiar?
It looks a little bit like the one they were just talking about.
What part of it?
When he was talking about that those transgressions that I have committed cleanse you from abundant mercy. Well, it's a little different, but it kind of rings a little bit like the other one.
Okay. Let's look at the next line. The Hainu vidui derav hamnuna zute beyoma dechipure. This was the vidui, right? The confession of Ram Hamnuna Zute, right? Some Babylonian Amora, beyoma dechipure. On Yom Kippur, right? So remember in the Tosefta, we talked about like a vidui of Yom Kippur. So what the Gemara is telling us is that this was the vidui that Rav Hamnuna Zuti used, right? So he used Rava's prayer, personal prayer, as a vidui. So that may help us understand something about the context of the Tosefta when it's saying that a person can pray after the Tefilah, his own words, even like the vidui of Yom Kippur. So here we seem to have an example of that. This prayer is in the Netzor. If you look, I don't know if you have a Netzor handy, but
Yeah, I do.
If you look, let me see if I have a Netzor handy. One second.
I have a Netzor, so what page?
Look at the end of the Amidah in Yom Kippur.
End of Amidah. Let's see. Where is Let's see.
Page 221.
221, okay. And what do you notice there, Max?
Well, it's pretty close to what we have, at least looking at the English.
But what do you see there at the end of the Amidah?
I see the Rava's prayer, and then I see Elohai Netzor after it.
Right. So the one we just saw, the prayer of Rava, about, help me to not sin,
Mhm.
right? Cleanse me of my sins, but don't cleanse me by suffering and sickness. Right. And then we see that Rav Hamnuna Zuti used this on Yom Kippur. Well, so does our Machzor. Right. So I'll hold up. I don't have this is the Koran Machzor. This is, I'm putting up on the screen, Elohai ad shalom netzarti eini chadai. That is Rava's prayer, and that comes right before the traditional end of the Amidah, which is Elohai Netzor lishoni meira. So that's, down there and then up there. So it's interesting that the liturgy picked up this personal practice of one rabbi, and made it fixed for everybody, essentially. And its function is as a meditation that comes at the end of the personal Amidah on Yom Kippur. It's not done during the repetition by the Shaliach Tzibur. It's done just by the individual in their own Amidah.
I like it says, save me from a bad mishap, from evil inclination, and from a bad woman.
Where do you see that?
Just below, when Mar, the son of Ravina, would conclude his prayer, he said the following.
Oh,
We haven't gotten there yet, I guess.
We haven't gotten there yet. Yeah.
Just
So, one rabbi at a time. So,
yeah, right.
Now, I want to also explain one other detail in this particular bracha. There's the idea that suffering in some way purifies a person of their sins. And so that's what he's referring to. He says, "Lo al yedei yisurin v'chol ha'imra'im." Not, clean me of my sins, but don't use. I don't want to suffer to do so. Let it be a little easier, right? Have mercy on me. So yeah, but again, a very personal prayer, and it had an origin. It had a person who composed this. Okay. Now let's continue. Mar Berei de Ravina. Ki hava Messiah slote amar hachi. So Mar, the son of Ravina. So this is one of the latest Amoraim. When he would complete his Tefilah, he would say the following: Elohai Netzor lishoni meira v'siftotai midaber mirma. Right? This is what we just looked at. My God, guard my tongue from evil and my lips from speaking deceit. V'lim kalalai nafshi tidom v'nafshi ke'afar lakol tiyeh. To those who curse me, let my soul be silent, and may my soul be like dust to all. Petach libi b'toratecha v'mitzvotecha tirdof nafshi. Open up my heart to in your Torah, and in your mitzvot may my soul pursue. V'tatzileni mipegara miyetzer hara u'meisha ra'a u'mikol ra'ot hamitragshot lavo ba'olam. Right, now we have something a little different. Save me from a bad mishap, from the evil inclination, from a bad woman, and from all evils that suddenly come upon the world. And then v'chol hachoshvim alai ra'a mehera hafer atatam v'kalkel machshavotam. Now we're back to what we see in our Siddur. And all who plan evil against me swiftly thwart their counsel and frustrate their plans. And he concludes, the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart find favor before you, Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Right? So that's Mar Baravina's prayer, personal prayer, right? This is what he would recite at the end of the Amidah.
That looks like it's made for a man, because he's talking about a bad woman.
You think?
Well, can a woman talk about a bad woman? Yes, but I think it's more geared towards men.
Of course it is. Of course it is.
Yeah,
And,
that one line seems to have been omitted.
Which line?
The one with the bad woman.
And the bad woman that didn't
Yeah.
make it into the
yeah.
Siddur.
Well, but we also had in our Siddur, we have, do it on account of your name, do it on account of your right hand, on account of your holiness, on account of your Torah. On account of you should save your right hand, let your right hand save me and answer me, right? So there's a little addition to our our Siddur, but we can see that our Siddur has basically taken Mar's prayer and inserted it at the end, minus that.
So when do those edits happen?
Well, it's really hard to know. And I just, in terms of a comment on a bad woman, this misogyny was part of part of society. I think all of kind of the classic, depictions of the woman as the temptress, things like that. And here it seems to be putting her on the same level as the Yetzer Hara, right? The evil inclination, which was also kind of associated with the demonic or, a natural catastrophe, right? Evil that comes upon the world. All right, these are all things that I can't control, but that might, cause me harm or lead me astray in some way. And so Mar throws all that into his prayer. Fortunately, our tradition has removed that line, made it a more palatable line for all. But how did we get there? How did we get from a personal prayer by one rabbi becoming now part of our fixed prayer? Remember, the Tosefta is talking about individual personal prayers, right? The outpourings of our heart. And what do we end up with is we have now a fixed prayer, which is the opposite of the outpourings of our heart, right? So now, as beautiful as this prayer is for us and as personal and meaningful as it might be, it is not the genuine outpourings of our heart, right? It's there in black and white in our Siddur. So how did we get there?
Its tone is personal compared to other prayers. It's talking about the first person singular. All about the person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I. Yeah. It's a personal prayer.
All right. Well. Okay. I don't think we've looked at Machzor Vitri before. Machzor Vitri is one of the early Siddurim that we have. The word Machzor means a cycle, like a continuous cycle. So Machzor Vitri is describing the cycle of the prayers over the course of the year. It's Ashkenaz. It's from Ashkenaz, and I don't know, maybe 12th or 13th century, something like that. But it's one of our early important sources in terms of how the Siddur, the origin of the Siddur, and it brings a lot of its teachings from Seder of Amram, which we've talked about a number of times. Seder of Amram, that was really the first printed Siddur dating back to the 9th century. And so here, Machzor Vitri says the following: Ubatar de misayem tzlote, after he completes his prayers, right? That's, by the way, the same Aramaic language that we saw in the Talmud, just on the previous page. Ibaile lemeimar v'vidui inami mide debae rishuta biyade, right? So after one finishes one's prayers, if one wants to recite vidui, confession, or alternatively to ask for something, one may do so, right? So the Tefilah ends. If you want to recite a confession or ask for something, this is the time to do it, right? This is the time for personal prayer. Then, v'hachi tiknu L'meimar batar tzlote avinu malkeinu Eloheinu yachid shimcha be'olamecha Elohai Netzor l'shoni Elohai ad shelo notzarti ad yihiyu l'ratzon nimrefi v'hegyon lebi lefanecha Adonai tzari v'goali. All right. And they decreed that one should say after one's prayers, Avinu Malkeinu, right? Our Father, our King, your name is unified in all of your world, right? And I think that actually is one of the other prayers that appears in the Talmud in the list of personal prayers that rabbis would offer at the end of the Amidah, right? So, and then Elohai Netzor l'shoni, that's the one that's in our Siddur, right? Guard my tongue from evil. And then Elohai ad shelo notzarti, right? That's the other one we saw. That was Rava's prayer that we now recite on Yom Kippur. So they mention that prayer here as well. And then it says, ad until Yiyu l'ratzonim refi, right? So may the words of my mouth. So what Machzor Vitri seems to be, I mean, it's kind of saying two different things. On the one hand, it says if you want to have personal prayers, this is the time to do it. And then it's saying, and they decreed the following prayers belong here. And then it cites 3 rabbinic prayers, and then adds the Yihiyu l'ratzon line at the end of it. And that's the set liturgy that Machzor Vitri is describing to us. Now, when they say they decreed that one should say, I don't know, I'm guessing he's probably referring to Rav Amram, several centuries early, which is considered to be an authoritative source. And we've talked about how when Rav Amram writes that book, it puts down on paper, or maybe on parchment, a set liturgy that until then was not uniformly practiced in the Jewish world, but it spread, and as a result, it consolidated a lot of liturgy, which is why we have an Ashkenazi tradition of what our prayers look like, or a Sephardi tradition of what our prayers look like. So it began with Seder of Amram Gaon, responding to the question of what exactly needs to be in the service. And so we see this here at the end of the service. We're certainly adding on to what Rabban Gamliel and the rabbis of the Mishnah established as the fixed liturgy that a person should say every day.
Could I just ask, what is the difference between order and cycle in terms of the literature? I mean, we have Machzor, we have Seder.
Order means Seder, yeah. And that refers to reciting particular things in a particular order, right? So the Seder on Pesach, right, is that we've got 15 steps of the Seder. They've got to be, we have to say certain things in a certain way, or at least cover certain themes at different times. Now, Machzor means cycle, and that's the idea that we're doing something on a cyclical basis, right? So
we have to do it over and over again.
Every year on this holiday, we do the following thing. Every week on Shabbat, we light candles, right? Or every day we say the Shema with blessings followed by the Amidah, right? So that's all part of a Machzor, a kind of recurring cycle of behaviors, right? So it's interesting that a prayer book can be referred to as a Siddur or a Machzor, right? All right, now let's go back to our closing meditation. Remember, with Machzor Vitri, he ended it with Yihiyu l'ratzonim refi. No mention of Oseh Shalom, right? Oseh Shalom does not seem to be part of the Amidah. It is not the conclusion of the Amidah. It wasn't for Mar Bar Ravina in the Talmud, and it's not, by the time we get to Machzor Vitri, it's also not there as the conclusion to the Amidah.
So who put it here?
So what is it? Yeah, so we've got these two verses, or these two sentences. The first is Yihiyu l'ratzon, and the second is Oseh Shalom b'mromav. So the first one is from the Psalms, right? Psalm 19:15. Yihiyu l'ratzonim refi v'hegion libi lefanecha Adonai tzari v'goali, period. So when Rav Bar Ravina includes this in his prayer, he's just citing Psalms. And when Machzor Vitri says, this is how you end the Amidah up to Yihiyu l'ratzon, that's what he's talking about. Now, Oseh Shalom b'mromav, this is not a biblical quote, although part of it is from a biblical quote. And for that, we open Job. Right. Hamishel v'fachad imo oseh shalom b'mromav. Right, so we get 3 words, right? Hamishel v'fachad imo, dominion and dread are his. He imposes peace in his heavens, right? So now we've got one of Job's friends trying to talk to him about the nature of God, and this is what he tells him, right? this is JPS's translation. Oseh means make. Here they use imposes, which is maybe not such a peaceful word. So, but in any event, it gets used as the basis of, gets transformed into a prayer, because in Job it's not a prayer. Here, Oseh Shalom, the one who brings peace, Bimromav, in his heavens, or really Marom is on high, in his heights. Hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu. May he bring peace, aleinu, upon us and upon all of Israel. And of course, we use this line at the end of the Kaddish Yatom and the Kaddish Shalem as well. It's kind of a good concluding type of line. I don't know when this was added as a final concluding sentence for the Amidah. But I think it's a nice way to end, though, that we end our prayers with peace. And by the way, it's not so out of context either, because if you recall the last of the blessings of the Amidah, the last blessing was Birkat Shalom. It was the blessing of peace, right? Where we end, that's where Sim Shalom comes in, right? Make peace. Hamavarech et Amo Yisrael v'Shalom. God blesses the people of Israel with peace. And so now, even after this meditation, we come back to that theme again of peace with the Oseh Shalom line. All right.
Okay.
It was good.
Probably that's a good place to stop. Any questions or comments? So sometimes people will, people will ask about adding personal prayers, and this is the place to do it, right? So at the end of the Amidah, this is, as originally envisioned by the rabbis, this is the time to add one's personal prayers. It might be nice, I think I've seen this in some Siddurim, if the Siddur itself would provide that invitation to worshipers at this point to formulate their own prayers in their own language. Because it clearly was the original intent of the rabbis. It's clearly the ideal prayer, as described both by Maimonides and by Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav. And this is really the unfortunate drawback of having a Siddur that is so full of words, is that in a lot of ways it discourages us from offering our own personal prayers.